Welcome to the District 3 December community meeting. We're going to wait another minute while folks are still joining from the waiting room. I hope everyone's doing well, staying warm. I was at the Morningside PTA meeting. It's cold outside. If you have not been outside today, it is chilly. Good to see folks. Thanks for joining. We'll get started and just give us another minute or two while folks move into the waiting room.
Good morning, Dr. Zeff.
Hey there, Renard. How you doing? Thank you for that invitation for that Principal of the Year. I really appreciate that. Thanks for all you guys do.
You're welcome. And also, I just want to put out here, if you can make it Tuesday, I'm sponsoring the Midtown Speech and Debate Team.
I heard. My son told me that. Thank you. Gosh, that means I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get away, but I really appreciate the word spreading that you guys are helping out, and that means a lot to the school. It means a lot to the teacher. Anytime we can celebrate a teacher like that, it's good for our kids.
All right. See, I just want to put that out. I think it starts at 4:30 if you can make it. Yeah.
I'll take another look, but it's busy time of year. Busy time of year. Welcome everybody. Welcome. Thank you. I see Dr. Bracken. Thank you, Dr. Bracken, for joining us too. Hallie, breaking away from the second grade holiday party at Morningside. Great to see everybody. All right. Well, I think we can get started. I know we'll get folks that'll be joining as we go. All right, Keith, we get to start? Keith gives me the thumbs up. All right, welcome everybody to the December District 3 community meeting. I'm just going to go through some brief norms like we always do. I know we all know it, but never hurts to remind folks. The purpose of these meetings is to share what's going on in the district. I'm eager to hear your perspective, but this is not a decision-making meeting. We're not going to call a vote on issues at the end. We're going to present a little content, and then at least half the meeting is going to be for you all to share feedback that staff and I need to hear. A couple of norms, let's all presume good intent. Give space, make space, so all folks are heard. Feel free to use the chat. We will be monitoring the chat. Keith and others can keep an eye on the chat and make sure that if questions come up that I missed, that folks can get to it. We're going to stick to an hour. We're going to respect folks' time, so we'll wrap up right around 11. I do have a newsletter. If you're not getting it, it's my promise to you is the District 3 newsletter will always be free. It's more information than you need, but not more than you deserve. So I'll make sure I'll put that link in the chat for folks that aren't getting that. And I do appreciate everyone's engagement. So we got three topics we're going to talk about today. Board meeting update. So I'm going to give you it was a long board meeting on Monday. It's always a long board meeting, but I'm just going to pick up a few topics that I think are particularly relevant to our community. Then we have Dr. Bracken, who's going to give us a little bit of a rundown as we enter into budget season at the schools and some of the decision points that our school councils will have to make. And then we'll have some general Q&A. So first couple few updates as we dive in. Last day of the semester is Friday, December 20th. So I hope everyone enjoys a restful, recharging winter break. We'll see your kiddos back on January 7th, not January 6th. January 6th is a teacher work day. So do not bring your kid off then because the school doors will be locked. The state of the district is January 14th. I think we're going to get more information about that coming up, but that will be Dr. Johnson's 100th day. And so that will give him an opportunity to kind of share his reflections, what he's been in all of our buildings. He's been in work, talked to folks throughout the district. He's going to share out what he's learned and set some priorities for the rest of the year and beyond. I want to give a hearty congratulations to our District 6 representative, Ishay Collins, who was recently elected to the Atlanta City Council. That happened, sometime recently this week. She prevailed in that runoff. The board will, once she gets sworn in, the board will go through a process of appointing her representative to fill District 6 seat. And then that person will, of course, be in the runoff. We'll have to stand for election again at the end of next year when that cycle is up. So more information is coming out on that. But we're going to move pretty quickly, I think, to fill that seat so we can make sure that that District 6 has a representative. Okay, one more update on from the board meeting on Monday that I thought was particularly useful was the building utilization presentation by Dan Drake and his team. For those of you that that missed that, they basically provided some enrollment projections of what they think the district is going to look like over the next couple of years. What you saw in Midtown was, while it's spiking up, it will come back down according to their projections. We see at Jackson is continuing, parents continuing to move to the community and putting more pressure on enrollment. And so there's going to be, I don't know if Travis is on the call. I don't see him, but they'll start engagements in January to start gathering parent feedback and figure out what our options are. The idea is that in the beginning of next fall, if they were going to have any suggestions for board first read, that's when you would start to see those, and then for action for the following year. So we're still in an information gathering posture right now. I know the administration is strongly considering not rezoning students from one cluster to another. That is what Dr. Johnson has made clear to me, and I certainly support that. But we're going to have to stay on top of projections to make sure that our district capacity matches our enrollment. One more item before I ask Dr. Bracken to share a little bit about the budget for next year. Legislative priorities. We approved those as a board as the legislative session begins shortly after the new year. A couple things, there's a lot there, but the items that were front and center were ensuring that we don't use this that we continue to invest and fully fund QBE. The state has a big surplus. This is the time to continue to put our foot on the gas to make sure our schools have the support they need to do the work. We are supporting legislation to address the commercial property digest as a resource for school funding. This is something that I have a lot of energy around. Our commercial properties are vastly underappraised, which puts more burden on our residential homeowners to contribute to public education. This is a complicated issue. It has to do with the commission, it has to do with the legislature, the business community, or the real estate community, I believe, has an opportunity to do more. And so that is something that we are going to continue to prioritize. And then encouraging legislation for safe storage for families and communities. This is something that I think there should be bipartisan agreement on. There's a lot of good ideas out there. We have to make sure that we keep guns out of kids' hands, and that adults are responsible for responsible gun owners in the same way that we put fences around pools. We should be doing the same thing in our gun community. So that's something that we're going to advocate for at the legislature. All right, covered a lot of ground there. As we transition into this budget conversation, I asked Dr. Bracken to present. There's lots of components to the budget. The piece that I really want to focus on are these decision points at the school level, because I think you all have an important role to play in what your schools look like. And that's really part of the ethic of the charter system, is really pushing the funds down to the school level so the schools can customize their program and meet the needs of their unique communities, rather than central office directives that really tie school hands. And so as you hear Dr. Bracken talk about some of the decision points around the different components that schools have the opportunity to put into their building, I would ask you to take that back to your go teams, to your school communities, and start advocating for what you think your school needs based on data. And I think this has a real opportunity to make sure that each of our schools meet the needs of their community instead of a one-size-fits-all, which I don't think for a district as diverse and complex as Atlanta Public Schools, I don't think meets our needs. So with that, Dr. Bracken, let me turn the mic over to you and let you share some of what you shared at this week's board meeting.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Want to make sure that you can see my school allotment screen. Awesome. We are going to dive right in. I'm going to give a quick, like 30-second overview of how our schools are currently earning their dollars. I know if you're on here, you're probably engaged in that process. Many of you may be on Go Teams already, and so this may be a little overview. But I think it's important to ground us in what we're doing currently so that I can help tee up some of the recommendations for changes for next year. And as board member Zeff mentioned, how you play an important part of that process. So our school allotment formulas, we use a student weighted funding formula. We do that here at APS because we believe that it allows us to be more student focused, that we're allotting based on attributes and needs of student populations and not just buildings or staff needs, adult needs. It allows us to push money out in a more equitable, predictable way. But the piece I want to highlight for this group is empowerment. So the way that our student weighted funding formula gives dollars to schools is through a per pupil allotment. You receive your dollars as dollars, not positions. So that allows for a lot of site-based flexibility and autonomy. If you are following along with our soft G conversations with the board meeting, you can feel some tension around the need for very targeted and specific outcomes and outputs against a culture that has a lot of flexibility in the inputs, right? And so there's an ongoing conversation around how flexibility and autonomy can lead to greater outcomes for students. And so some of the pressure that we are trying to alleviate in this upcoming budget process is to allow our principals and our Go teams to more closely align their discretionary spending, so their autonomy, with the specific outcomes that they're trying to target in their school. What that means is that our Go teams are acting like mini boards, that's what they are, but they're going through the same process that our district board of education is going through when they are approving the overall budget. So they should be asking questions about how does this flexibility, how does this autonomy ultimately help us meet our goals at our school level. And so about 60% of the total school allotments is given to the principals and the Go teams in those flexible dollars. So you have a lot of discretion in all of these categories that are in blue. Some of the conversation for this upcoming year, well, I'll just say that also that 60% is broken out by weights. And so a lot of the equity weights, the grade level weights, poverty weights, those allocations are going out to schools for specific needs. We're giving dollars to schools to target specific student populations, some of which are struggling academically. And so we want to make sure that these dollars that are being targeted for those allocations, for those populations, are actually being used in ways that data supports is actually going to help those students. And so equity and resources only really works if we also see that those equitable dollars are being used for best practices to help those student populations. Some of the decision points we have for this upcoming budget cycle, these are the things that we're noodling right now and we'd love your feedback on. So if we are allowing flexibility and autonomy for our schools to make site-based decisions, what we need to get our arms around is flexibility from what, right? So what is that base? What is that standard that we would then flex from? And with our student weighted funding formula, we haven't really had that in the last few years, what that base allocation, that base standard should be for every single school. So we're going back and we're actually building two sets of budgets this year. We're building the budgets using our student success funding model, just like we have in the last 5 years. But we're also building it using a more traditional allocation model. And that is based on a set of recommendations from our teaching and learning teams, from our cluster superintendents, saying every school should be able to afford this suite of positions, programs at their school, so that then when the schools are flexing off of that, they're able to show the data that supports that flex, why they've decided to maybe run larger class sizes so that they can invest more in student support services. Maybe they are converting some of those student support categories so that they can have really small class sizes because they believe direct instruction is the most impactful thing at their school, right? But without having that base to flex off of, we haven't been able to really track the data and how that correlates with the students' outcomes. So that's that first work that we're doing, is figuring out what that base allocation will be. And then, so these are the types of positions, programs, funding categories that we're looking at making sure every school is able to afford at a minimum. And then once we are able to align on this recommendation, we'll start working with our cluster. We've already started this work. Our cluster superintendents will be meeting with the principals advisory and teacher advisory groups next week to get feedback on what these base allocation formulas should look like. For this group today, what I'm most interested in is this slide, which is, and then what? So once we've determined what every school earns at a minimum, and we've determined the formulas through which those schools will earn those allocations, which categories should schools have flexibility with? Which ones should we hold tight, which means that we believe that there is because of compliance, because of just the rigidity of how reporting might be, or just because the juice isn't worth the squeeze on some of these categories, we just want somebody to allocate centrally and let's move on. So those are those tight categories. Flexible would be, we have some discretion at the school level, but we're going to have to explain why we're coming off of that base allocation. We're going to have to be able to show the data and how that data supports us moving students based on our own school's goals if we allocate differently than what we've earned for these flexible allocations. And loose, schools just have the autonomy to budget these as they see fit or as they need to based on their Go Teams allocations. When we talked to principals about this at the principals meeting back in October, you can see all of these blue bars are where they've said they really want more autonomy. Really, we see the categories to the left being more tied to direct instruction. So things like their teacher allocations, their non-personnel, their stipends, their some of the direct instructional coaches and paras, how they use those. They want the most leverage where it actually impacts student instruction. Then when you see in the middle is the category around administration. So these are some of those positions that are more support in nature. That's where you see your assistant principals, registrars, some of those types of positions, bookkeepers. They want some flexibility with that, but less impactful to direct instruction. They don't see quite as much need for full loose autonomy around those. And when we get to the right, those are things like student safety, the support services. These are the types of things where there's a lot of compliance around them, custodial allotments. They're just saying, give me those, run my school so I can focus on instruction. What you see here is the principals asking for most autonomy where it comes to direct instruction, and less where there's less impetus around changes to directly impact students. And so what we're currently doing right now is looking at those allocations, refining the SSF formulas so that we can make sure every school is earning enough through their allocations to be able to afford that base. And then we'll start building out those department budgets in order to get them out into the school's hands by January 15th. So very quick turnaround. So I'll pause here. That's my presentation, but I don't know how you want to get feedback, Ken. We'd love to hear from folks on the call about where they think, again, if we're thinking about juice being worth the squeeze, where there is the most impact for our cluster advisory teams, our school Go teams, and our principals to make discretionary decisions. I'd love to hear from this group on that.
Thanks, Dr. Brackton. So yeah, and I appreciate this this framing, because folks know I have I have a strong preference towards keeping as much flexible as possible. Though I understand every school needs a bookkeeper, every school needs a secretary, and we don't want to burden our administrators having to make a lot of those decisions. So yeah, I think let's take a few minutes, Keith, if you want to direct traffic, and then just so folks have a sense of how I'm thinking about this, we'll spend maybe about 10 or 15 minutes talking about this budget, providing feedback either via verbally or via chat on these budget questions, and then I want to open it up and make sure folks have time to address other issues. So Keith, if you want to direct traffic around budget first, and then we can pivot to other district questions.
Yes, Dr. Zeff. And so again, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our December District 3 community meeting. As Dr. Zeff has just said, we will spend a few minutes just talking about budget, and then we'll transition to our general conversations. So we'll take Lisa first, and then Dr. Bracken. We do have a question in the chat that is asking, can you explain program admins? Are these coordinators or directors? So
yeah, the program administrators are they're similar to an assistant principal, but they oversee the secondary campuses for our dual campus schools. So those are only allotted for schools that have 2 campuses.
All right. Good morning, Lisa.
Hi, I have a question. On the slide that we're looking at right now, the signature, under the flexible column is signature. I'm assuming that's like the person who oversees the signature programming process and achieving the certifications. Is that right?
The signature programs is actually a dollar allotment that all schools receive based on number of students that they have, where they are in their signature program development or adoption. And they use those dollars to support the signature programs, one position of which is typically that site administrator for signature programs.
And has that position previously been required, or is that changing to you just have those dollars and you can use it how you want towards your signature program?
I believe there has been a requirement from the program administrator that there is at least one person at the school designated to oversee signature programs. But other than that, there's been a lot of flexibility with those dollars.
Okay, so is that changing if it's in the flexible category? Is that change? So it is still
it would still have to be, so anything that's in that flexible would kind of be like up for negotiation, right? So we would probably request that every school have one person to oversee, and then if you want to vary from that, you would need to be able to explain how not having somebody oversee the program at your school will still ensure that the program is viable, that it's yielding the outcomes for students that those dollars are intended to achieve.
Okay. And then I'm sorry, it's kind of a follow-up, but where did that signature program fall on the principal feedback?
Let's see. So it is, yell it if you see it before I do.
I'm looking too.
It was on the flexible side, so about a quarter.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I also had a question on this, and then this will be my last question, I promise. The principal feedback, it said 39 total respondents.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that wasn't 100%. Did you feel that that was representative of the entire district, or were there any areas in the district that were not responsive that might not be reflected here?
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually got them at the principal's meeting, so we were there real time. And when we looked at the results, it was pretty much across the board from our elementary, middle, high school, and across clusters.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Our next speaker would be Lindley.
Hey, good morning. I had a question. I know the Go teams at each specific school are looking at all this, and I know the CAT team is looking at all this. And while there are different focuses, depending on whether you're elementary, middle, or high school, are the clusters principals and administrations working together at this? Because if you're a STEAM cluster, your focus in elementary may be more focused on STEAM and less on language versus an IB cluster. Are they able to meet and differentiate per cluster versus just per school?
Yeah, so we are meeting with the cluster superintendents, so they've been a part of this conversation as well, and they're bringing that perspective. But I will say that's really why we would want to shift as much to that flexible column as we can, right? So, because exactly to your point, every cluster, every school might have an area of focus that's slightly different than another's. And so what we would want to do is to be able to, with justification and data, make the case for why one school might put way more into one program as opposed to another school.
And actually, we have Ms. Sofianis on the call, who's our. Let me just congratulate, because I don't think I've had the opportunity to congratulate Sofianis in public for her now being the cluster superintendent for Jackson and Midtown cluster, which is most of what District 3 is. We got a little bit north of Atlanta. I see you, Garden Hills, but mainly we spend our time in Jackson and Midtown. Ms. Sofianis, Audrey, you want to say a word about how you're thinking about supporting schools in this process?
Yes, sure. Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. So I will tell you that's exactly what happens once the budget rolls out. The principals of each cluster will come together and really talk, maybe even more than once. It's really a part of the whole process of the budget to take whatever those flexible dollars are and take a look at this, kind of adjusted format and maximize what they can for each of the schools within the cluster. So it's a very, very collaborative process.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And again, welcome to the new,
Thank
I
you.
was actually just at Morningside this morning. They miss you, but they wish you well. They wish you well. Keith, were there other questions?
Yeah, well, we, Dr. Bracken, we just had a stakeholder who just wanted clarity around the description.
The columns.
Yep.
Yeah, so if it's under tight, that is something that we would require the schools to have we would have in every school, right? So how much you have or how much it varies might change a bit. Some of these are central office allocations, right? So special education, those teachers are being allocated by a program administrator in the central office based on formulas and IEPs and all of that. And so the request is that schools use the positions that they've been allocated. So that one is held more tight. Under loose, principals have a lot of discretion, right? So they have a lot of flexibility in how they allocate for their core teachers and some of their business administration, including like assistant principals and clerks. Flexible is those allocations that schools can negotiate, right? So there's going to be a base allocation. There's going to be a certain amount that schools will generate through their per pupil allocations. And if they decide to deviate off of that, that's fine. But we want to show how that deviation aligns to the school's goals, right? So if you're trying to achieve a certain I'll use an example here around school attendance, right? So if a school is really all in on school attendance, they want to make sure that they are able to get kids in class, then they might invest more heavily in like counselor allocations, or maybe even some family engagement funds, maybe some behavior incentives, right? So they might be investing heavier there, and they might come off of some of those other allotments in order to do that. We just want schools to be able to show how those investments are being targeted towards their specific school goals. So flexible just means that those are the things that principals are going to be talking to their cluster superintendents about and justifying why they are making the decisions they're making in those allocations.
And like Lisa said, this is what happens at the board table too. Staff shares data, shares their perspective, and that negotiation happens. And that's really what we're trying to mimic it at the school level. Lisa, there was a question from Jennifer about the overcrowding supplement,
yep.
Which is in District 3. This is something we think a lot about at Midtown and Jackson, which are both pushing up against those boundaries. Can you give a little bit of voice to what those schools should expect in the coming budget cycle?
Sure. So we actually introduced a new weight category last year that was very similar to our small school supplement. And what it does is it allocates additional dollars for every student above, I think 90, maybe 95% capacity. And so it's generating an additional $150,000 in schools that have high capacity or over capacity. so that schools can use those dollars to try to mitigate that as needed, maybe hall monitors, maybe different things at the school level to be able to support that. And we'll continue doing that for this upcoming budget cycle.
All right, yeah, Keith, we can take a few more questions on budget before we pivot.
All right, I think we got you, Kiko. Cole. Sorry.
Hey, Kiko, how we doing? I think you're still on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we got you.
Sorry about that. So I think it's great that and it's been always one of my big complaints about everything being one size fits all and needing to push down autonomy into the schools. So I'm glad to hear this. But sometimes the things that get pushed down eat up a lot of the budget. So how does this interact with, for instance, like there were district-wide decisions made about, say, accelerated math, or district-wide decisions about remediation, or what curriculum we would use, or how would we use advisory classes. Like what kind of autonomy? I mean, so much of what the teacher or the principals have to spend their money on can be pushed down in those kinds of decisions. So how is that being balanced as far as this flexibility budget and what everybody has to do kind of concept?
Yeah. So at this point, we aren't, and again, we're in the middle of the budget development process, but we aren't actually building the formulas out yet. So we are going to be having conversations next week around reviewing what programs we already have in the schools. So what I'm hearing your question is there more that will be decentralized that is currently at the decision-making discretion or authority at the central office so that schools can have more decision-making authority? I don't have those answers for you yet. I'll be asking those questions. I will just say that with the current conversation around kind of structuring more accountability around outcomes for academics specifically, I don't know that we'll see a lot of additional dollars coming into schools for additional flexibility around things like curriculum. I see more tightening in those areas. If there's anybody else from our teams, from the academics or school side of the house that wants to add into that, because I'm not the expert on how those like curriculum decisions are being made. I'm the funding lady. So if anybody wants to weigh in on that, I will gladly defer, but we are having those conversations. The current formulas that I'm building aren't putting any additional dollars into schools for things like curriculum decisions.
Okay. Kiko, are you referring to dollars or curricular decisions more?
I think it's, I know that they're separate concepts, but like all of this sounds great about flexibility and autonomy and whatever. But if at the end of the day, APS is still pushing down curricula that doesn't work across the board, or still pushing down program, like saying you have to use Amplify, or you have to take away accelerated math, or then I don't care about the budgetary discretion if you're required to spend your budget on bad curriculum, on bad worksheets, on bad unit tests, you know what I'm saying? So like, I'm wondering whether, like, if you have to eat up a bunch of the budget with bad stuff to start with, I don't know. Like, I want to know what like the kind of quality control is on the stuff that's being made that strict part, like the strict part that everybody has to do. If that's going to include the stuff that we've been forced to do for the past 5 years, these kind of one size fits all decisions, then I feel like it's window dressing if they have autonomy on other stuff.
I appreciate that. And I think Amplify is a great example of that. So I think that's less of a budget issue, more of a curricular issue. I think this is what we're going to hear from Dr. Johnson next month when he gives his 100-day report out. But let me take that back and make sure that gets addressed, because I think really what you're talking about is how much curricular control does a school have, because the money is really kind of follows those decisions. And so,
exactly.
So it's less of an issue for Lisa Bracken, more of an issue for Tommy Usher and Dr. Butler. So let us take that back and make sure that we get, I think you'll hear more clarity in January about that, but I hear you and I sympathize.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you. And so, Dr. Zeff, we have two. We got one in the chat, and then Lisa has a follow up. So we'll do those two, and then we'll switch to general. All right. So Lisa, you got it. It's back on you.
So I think my question is probably very similar to Yukiko's, in that I think Yukiko is talking about curriculum that are required. So it's not coming out of the school's budget, but the APS is providing it. And at the same time, I believe last year there was curriculum, the APS said, we're not going to require you to use this anymore. For example, I believe it was for intervention curriculum. It was an intervention curriculum that APS was like, okay, y'all have flexibility now to choose your own curriculum, but there was no, what had previously been provided was no longer, there was no extra money to choose their own. So I think it's very similar, like what's coming from APS, is it vetted, is it working? And if schools are going to have that flexibility, if something's taken away, it's just kind of, you know, that's where the trade-offs start to happen. And I feel like, I know we heard from our principal that was a tough thing to account for when that curriculum was taken away and no extra money given.
Thanks for that, Lisa. This is the conversation I think we're having, that as Dr. Johnson's putting together his academic team, is really where he's been focused on, is making clear, you know, supporting what's working, and let's turn off. And, you know, let's just be honest, that there are going to be some things that are turned off because they're programs that have not demonstrated results. They're interventions that are costly and we're not seeing the outcomes. And so what can we, you know, my preference is to empower, you know, I've said this every opportunity I get, our principals are the most accountable folks in the system, without a doubt. I think that's right, because the principal is who everybody knows, who everybody sees. And so we need to empower them with their go teams to make decisions that are appropriate for their schools. And so that's always where I'm gonna lean into my energy. And so I think Dr. Johnson's still getting his arms around some of those questions about what's working, what's not. But I think you'll hear more clarity around that this 100-day.
All right. Thank you. And I think Dr. Bracken answered Cassandra's question in the chat, so we should be good there to just move directly to general conversations now. So community members, if you just want to engage with Dr. Zeff or in APS administration around anything APS related, district related, the floor is open for that. And just ask you just raise your hand and we'll call you accordingly. We got Song.
Yeah, hey. Hi, good morning. This is Sung Hee. So I think the question around the facilities is obviously top of mind for me. I'm a parent to a Spark. My kids are at Spark as well as Howard. And so, you know, we are on the Virginia Highland side, and so we remain aligned to Spark. And so, but I did see something most recently that was a little bit alarming to me. And it was shared in a forum, I believe, during one of the board meetings, and it showed utilization and potential enrollment for the future as well. And it showed that Springdale Park would actually be the least utilized elementary school in the cluster. And I think that's what they're anticipating. And so, I mean, I don't have like direct enrollment numbers in front of me, but I do know based on, you know, just interactions with friends who have kids at the other schools, is that Springdale Park only has 3 kindergarten classes. And I know that because my daughter's in kindergarten. And then I hear from some of the other schools, and I think Morningside has 6. I think VHE has 5. And so, and I think Mary Lynn may have 4 kindergarten classes. And so I see a high performing school that is now extremely underutilized. And so I'm curious in terms of like, has this been raised, you know, to APS, to the board? Are you all taking a look at this? How is this planning to be addressed? And I guess not addressed in a way where are there discussions taking place around possibly rezoning some of the other
I don't know, some of the other neighborhoods or things like that, like back into Spark.
I appreciate that, Sanki. It is something that we are looking at. That's why we had this presentation at the board meeting, just past earlier this week, where Dan Drake's team talked about the projections for the Midtown, well, the whole district. But thinking about the Midtown cluster, it's not surprised that when you add a new elementary school like Virginia Highland Elementary School, you add a bunch of capacity. So you're going to have, at least in the short term, a big surge in capacity because you basically introduce a bunch of new seats and turning Inman into Virginia Highland Elementary. I think this is something that we're keeping an eye on. I think this is over the next year. I think there's going to be some engagement opportunities, and if we need to adjust enrollment boundaries, I think that's a conversation that we would take to the parents and consider. But right now, none of the schools in the cluster are overcrowded. None of the elementary schools in the cluster are overcrowded. Morningside's starting to get close to its capacity. You're starting to see getting close. A lot of folks want to be part of the magic of District 3. There's a lot of excitement for the opportunities there. But I don't see, if your question is, will the boundaries be examined? I mean, we are looking at those every year, but is there going to be something dramatic that happens in District 3 elementary? I don't see any reason for that, at least as I look at the numbers. So I would say stay engaged over time, because we do, this is a fluid situation. You've got people, you've got new construction, you've got people moving in, et cetera. But as the district looks at it right now, I don't see anything dramatic happening at the elementary school.
But I mean, when we went through this, right, when the rezoning was taking place within the Midtown cluster at the elementary level, like what was actually presented to parents throughout the community engagement is actually inaccurate. Like that, I think that I heard that VHE actually had to add like 3 additional classes. Like there were, I think, up to like 100 additional kids who joined or who enrolled for that particular school. So like the enrollment data or projections were off is basically what I'm saying. So I do think that this is an opportunity to go back to revisit some of those enrollment projections, especially with some of the new build that's like coming through here, right? Like if the Amsterdam development goes through and that type of thing. So I guess what I'm saying is that I know that these schools are not, close to like what, I don't know, like a Midtown high school. Like I know that's a different type of issue that you're facing there in terms of like overutilized. But like when I'm looking at this, and I don't know how this impacts the budget overall, so I'm not as close to it, right? But when I'm looking at a school such as Spark that is now going to be underutilized, I mean, I do think that this is an opportunity to go back and look at it. It may not be an issue right now because Morningside and VHE are not at capacity, but I don't think it's equitable when you take a look at what's going on.
I appreciate that, and thank you, Jennifer Keenan, for dropping the utilization numbers in the chat. So I do think we do have to look at this every year, and the only what I would, if you look at the performance of all of these schools are all doing really, really well. And so all of these options are high performing options. So as a parent, my kids went to Morningside, but there's a variety. All of these schools, they're I think making really substantial gains for kids. You raise a good point about the Amsterdam Walk. So I have been engaged in those conversations. Folks that don't know about this, by Piedmont Park, they're talking about building 900 units where Sean's Coffee was in that area right by Piedmont Park. The communities, there's a separate call, the NPUs, and not everyone's thrilled with what they're talking about, but they're going to do something there. But it's still several years away before any of that would have an impact.
Yeah, I was just using that as an example, as the projection enrollments were mentioned, previously when we went through the rezoning. But I definitely don't think it's a watch and see what happens situation. I definitely think it's something that should be discussed up front, like proactively now, right? I mean, there are parents at Spark, who are concerned. So, but thank you for listening.
No, of course, and we are engaged in it very carefully. We spend a lot of time on it. This is and I see actually, to Alicia's comment, what are some of the highest priorities for District 3? Getting this capacity utilization right is critical for us. I mean, we have to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our kids. Again, this is more of a high school question right now than it is an elementary question, because I think for the moment, I mean, we may have to move, we may have to make some tweaks to elementary to make sure we get it right, to make sure capacity is evenly spread out over time. But, getting, Midtown and Jackson clusters right, I think is something that I've shared, that our community has a lot of energy. I've shared this with Dr. Johnson, and I think you're going to see a lot of engagement in the next couple of months on that issue. I think other topics that are top of mind for me, certainly getting our superintendent right, and I feel that we've got Dr. Johnson. I've been on the board now for coming up on 11 months. I think for those of you that met Dr. Johnson, I encourage you to tune in if you get an opportunity. He's really about the work, and really you won't see him on the front page of the paper. He's more about walking classrooms with principals. It was said about him yesterday, and he says, shepherds should smell like sheep, which is a colorful way that his pastor dad has used to say, of making sure that our district leadership is tightly engaged with our kids in our schools. And he's got, by the way, his son in Sutton Middle School, so he's living the experience. I think that's a priority. And then we got to get the budget right. We have to be responsible use of taxpayer dollars, and I think I appreciate Dr. Johnson taking a real hard look at central office spending and making sure that we're driving those dollars to our schools and to our classrooms, which is one of the reasons we gave an 11% raise to teachers last year. And we've got a lot of work to do to right size our budget, but those are a couple of my key priorities for District 3. All right, Keith, I'll turn it back to you
So we have 2 questions in the chat, and then we'll go over to Megan. So the first question from Alicia is, what are your highest priorities representing District 3?
Yeah, and I think I kind of just to succinctly say, getting the superintendent right, getting the budget right, managing capacity utilization. Those are the where I think the board can really lean in. But ultimately, we want to make sure, because our schools are pretty high performing. We have a lot of opportunity to get better. But I think if we get those 3 things right, we're going to continue on the right path.
And then it says, when we say school is underutilized, can you explain that more? And what does that mean?
Yeah, so essentially,
just FYI.
Say again?
I said Travis made it into the call as well. Just FYI.
Oh, good to know. You'll get an opportunity. We'll get an opportunity to hear Travis's voice. Yeah. So underutilized basically is the amount of capacity that a school has, basically, which is driven by its classroom space. So how many seats can a school how many kids can a school manage to accommodate this program, and then what percent of those seats are actually filled by kids. So you've got some schools that, and Jennifer put it in the chat just a minute ago, a school like Morningside, where I was just at this morning, it's getting pretty full. And so there's consequences when you get too full. You get things like crowded hallways. You even get teachers that have to move classrooms. None of those things are happening yet quite at Morningside, but those are impacts at Jackson and at Midtown High School. And so we want to make sure that we're managing those very carefully. Triggers action. Yeah. So I think, and Lisa, thank you for putting that in the that explanation in the chat. It is that 95% is that right place. The challenge when you get schools that are very low utilization is they end up having, and this is what Lisa Bracken was referring to a minute ago, you end up having to pull programs out. So if you have a very small school, you can't afford a lot of the programs and interventions that we want to see for our kids. And so that's why we talk about a sweet spot of being in the 90s, where you can have a full complement of programs and still be able to accommodate all kids.
All right. Our next speaker would be Megan, followed by Jennifer. Good morning, Megan.
Hey, good morning, and thanks, Ken. I'm a mom of 3 kids at Garden Hills Elementary School. We met at the board meeting last month, and I have a very specific facilities question, again, about the Garden Hills renovation schedule for next year. The facilities has now come with an alternate presentation that the parents are very much in favor of, or most of the parents that we've been speaking with, having a phased approach over 2 summers. And I didn't know if you have any idea when that may be coming up for board vote.
So the actual timing of that probably won't come before the board, because that's an administrative matter where it's usually when dollars need to be spent that it'll come before the board. And just so folks on the call who are from Garden Hills, you probably know this, that there's a renovation happening there, which is very exciting. It's a very old building, so it'll be down. Rather than move the kids to, I believe it was Bethune, which was across town, we're going to do it in 1 year. We're going to do it over 2 years and allow the kids to stay in place. I can, so I don't, as I mentioned before, I don't think that there's, let me check your Travis, do you know if there's anything that's going to come before the board there, or if that issue is settled?
I'll confirm, but I believe something's coming to the board in January just to approve spending, but I'll double check with Dan Drake.
But I said, from my understanding, it'll be on consent. It'll be an administrative matter that we just need to approve the spending. There isn't anything left for discussion as I sit here. At least no one's told me anything.
Thanks so much, because I know the way that it came about, it's just created a lot of anxiety within the parent community. And so I think there's just a lot of, we want to know when it's official. So I'll report back that hopefully in January with whatever budget consent agenda, hopefully it will go in there. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you, Megan.
All right, thank you, Megan. Good morning, Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. So my question is focused on Midtown capacity, and thank you to Lisa Olmsted for putting that information in the chat. And it says that in the board presentation, capacity at greater than 100% over capacity triggers action. So I have a few questions. One, Midtown has been over 100% capacity for a few years now. So I'd like to know what action was triggered, and specifically what action has been taken. And then my second point is I'm very concerned about the message that the demographic studies have shown that Midtown enrollment is going to decrease. It's counterintuitive that you would add an elementary school to the Midtown cluster and have all of those elementary schools feed into the high school and expect that high school enrollment would decrease. So what's going to happen if these projections are wrong and Midtown capacity continues to increase as it has been doing year over year?
Jennifer, always with the softball questions. Now, look, this is something that and we both have kids at Midtown, and it's something that we're dealing with on a regular basis. So just so folks know, some of the actions I've taken in the past, things like enrollment verifications, which has helped take some of the pressure off. Not a lot, and I think that's pretty much dried up. We had some kids that were not in the right boundary, and so that got corrected. There's been this added weight around to support the school with additional funds for overcapacity. To try to be helpful, and as any opportunities as new construction comes on, to not put that in the Midtown boundary. But all these things are on the margin. They're not dealing with the core issue. And I believe the school is about 95 kids over enrolled right now. I don't have that left. It's in my other bag, but I'm pretty sure it's in that area. So the question is, do we believe the enrollment projections that it's going to come back down? Because we had talked, moving kids out of the Midtown district is going to be painful. I mean, it's going to be difficult. It's not something that we do lightly, because we know it's very disruptive for families and for the community. What I've been told, and Travis, and I'll give you an opportunity to weigh in on this. What I've been told is that part of the issue is housing prices in our community have gotten high, and so young families are not moving in as much. And so that is, or by the time they get older, so maybe out of elementary age, they're moving outside the district. It's something we're going to keep an eye on. Your question about elementary school is a good one. I mean, part of it was a function of we had some extra capacity because we had a building. So it wasn't like we built a brand new building. We had Inman. Inman wasn't the right fit for the middle school, so Howard was created. Virginia High was turned into elementary school. We'll see if building it causes more kids to come. I don't know the answer to that. It's something we're going to watch carefully. Travis, I'll turn it over to you. Do you have any insight into these enrollment projections? I've heard this from a few parents. Are the numbers coming back down? What can give us confidence that that's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have more insight than what was shared, but I do know, Dr. Zeff, you kind of asked Dan Drake to show his work more on the projections. So once I'm able to get kind of the breakdown on how this all added up, and we can show our work a little better, then we'll share that out and about. But you're right, the challenge is rezoning, additions, any other shifts that we have to discuss the pros and cons of.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this before. I just would like to reiterate, capacity at Midtown seems to be measured by how many classrooms there are. And classrooms were added, buildings are converted, or I'm sorry, rooms are converted to classrooms. But obviously there's been no change to the cafeteria size, the gym size, the parking lot, the media center, the number of bathrooms. All of those things are busting at the seams. It's hard for kids to transition in the hallways because it's so crowded. So there's a real problem at Midtown, and I've been in the cluster for 13 years, and this has been discussed for 13 years. So we really need to take action and do something, and continuing to monitor is not enough. So I really hope that this new superintendent, this board, this administration does something, makes a real change. And Ken, you have been a leader on this, so I appreciate you. Please know this isn't, I'm not directed at you. You just happen to be hosting this forum. So thank you, Ken, for what you do. I hope that as a community, we can make this a priority and make some real changes.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I know this is not, there are not easy answers here. I did push Dan to show his work, because Dan Drake to show his work, because if it really, really, really is coming down, we don't want to tear apart the Midtown community if we don't have to. I share some skepticism, and that's why, and I've said that very publicly. It's not what I see when I drive around the community, but I know that's anecdotal. I am pleased though, there are 28 AP offerings at Midtown, so there is benefits to being a fully enrolled school. So I wouldn't want to take it, much below capacity, but we got to get to the bottom of it. We've got just a couple minutes left.
I was gonna say we can take Brittany, let her close us out, and then we'll turn it back over to you to offer some closing remarks, and we'll end it that way. Good morning, Brittany.
How are we doing, Brittany?
Good. How are you? I wanted to speak to the numbers. The projections are accurate for this year. I think y'all spend a lot of money, and we have dug through that data. If you don't stand by the numbers and the projections, it's what are you basing your decision on, but just anecdotal evidence, I guess. I think
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It just seems worth considering that the number they were under what you thought Midtown would be. And I haven't heard a single complaint this year out of, and I'm on the board of the PTO, about capacity. If anything, I heard complaints about losing some dollars because they were below projected enrollment this year.
Yeah, I mean, so let me just say, it's an imperfect science. I mean, you can do a projection and then kids show up, and so there is some movement there. I share your concern. I just want to create transparency so the community sees what we see, and that it's not me driving around and saying, well, that's interesting, I didn't see that house before. That's not a way to run a railroad. We've got people who are smart, Kavi and his team, that do this. What I ask, and Travis repeat, what I ask is, you got to show your work. You got to show us, what are you looking at? Are you showing at new housing starts? Are you looking at birth rates? Are you looking at enrollment, and how all of these pieces, so everyone can have so we can all have the same set of facts. But I'm with you. I think if there are benefits to a fully enrolled school like Midtown, as I said, we've got all the AP sciences, AP government, AP economics. We can only do those things because we have the capacity to do that. At the same time, Jennifer's exactly right that we don't want to hurt the learning experience, and so we're watching it. And hopefully, when we get that deeper information, we can feel confident that'll help give us a path forward. Thanks for your engagement and your commitment to our schools. We're at 10:59, folks. More importantly, we are 10 days away from winter break. Push your kids. Let's get the most. Every day is a learning day. And I'm also saying this out loud to remind myself. let's try and get the most out of these next 2 weeks. I appreciate all your engagement. I'll put my information in the chat one last time if folks need something. I just thank you. Let me just thank Keith publicly for all his good work. These are not these are difficult jobs, and we appreciate all your energy in making us helping us do our job. Oh wait, okay, I think the information is in there. Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy your break, rest up, and we'll see you again in the new year.
All right. Happy holidays, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.